Good morning everybody and welcome back to a little bit of a different video today, because on August 1st LEGO will be releasing 5 sets for the artist Olivia Rodrigo, and this is one of very few times in LEGO's history where they have decided to go for a specific musician and do sets with them. I can think of only BTS and the Beatles currently in memory, and it's even more rare for it to be someone current, popular and alike, because making sets based off celebrities is a risk. Now, when I heard this was announced, I got maybe my hopes up a little bit too high, because there is a certain, I don't want to say adjacent because he definitely stands on his own completely, but there was a certain artist that I was maybe a little unreasonably expecting that we could have seen a little reference to, or if they were looking for some extra figures to put in the sets, trying to crack more of a demographic, there was part of me that hoped we were going to get a bit of a dream figure here. Alas, this was not the case. But Mr. Conan Gray, I could not see you not get a LEGO set. And given that I don't think the official company will be doing it anytime soon, I have been putting together a little model for a while now, since before these sets have leaked, to, well, just test my own skills, but also to try out something new, because for a while now I've been wanting to create a album cover out of LEGO. And you know what, why not choose Wishbone? Because it is one of my favorite albums and was my favorite album of last year, and I really like the cover and the style. So that is what I'm going to show you guys today. Now, for those of you that have been lurking around the community post, this may not come as too much of a surprise, as I have drawn this album cover in figure form back when it came out last year. I've also done a minifigure version which has popped up in the background a couple of times, and I went to the concert back in May as well. However, one thing I've been meaning to do ever since we started doing the Hollow Knight builds is practice my sort of organic sculpting. I've long admired builders that can sort of translate organic shapes and specific forms into sort of high quality builds, and while the Hollow Knight ones were a step in that direction with their round curves and sort of cartoonish proportions, I think the ultimate goal for a while has been to try my hand at a human. And let me tell you what, it is hard. This is not an easy task to do. So I'm going to show you my favorite details of the model, talk about some of the difficulties we have, and then I'm going to also show you what I'm planning to do for the album cover, because one of the biggest surprises I had while doing this was that this model ended up being a lot bigger than I thought. To the point where, let me just show you this. This is a 48 by 48 grey base plate. This is the biggest base plate that LEGO make. This thing is like, 15 inches tall, and this is in a crouched position to recreate the album, and he doesn't even have the space at the top of his head or at the bottom of his foot, which means that creating a base for this in the original style I wanted, which was using the smoke cloud pieces as the primitive background, is not going to work. So instead, we've tackled this. But we'll come back to this later, because I want you guys' feedback and opinion on this, and let me show you my sort of Conan Gray statue doll up close. So to start off with, the main goal here was to recreate the pose, which means that I wanted it to sort of have minimal sort of gappage and availability when we were posing the arms. And for those of you that are familiar, you will immediately notice that the pose is not quite being accurately recreated. There's definitely some jank going on, specifically with the wishbone that he's holding, but also with the legs, which isn't quite kicking out far enough. And part of that is compromised because my secondary goal here was to still make this semi-poseable. Now, it's a bit of a parts former, not in the sense that you have to sort of rearrange and reclip and rebuild from scratch, but in that there are a couple of assemblies, specifically at the elbows and at the sort of rear, where you need to remove elements in order to do it. But in theory, he could stand up and give you a wave, because the shoulders have articulation, there's the movement at the elbow. As I said, if you remove these sort of clips here, then his arms will be able to lower down to a flat position here. We've got rotation at the wrist as well, and the shoulders have a little more flex as well. Of course, there is neck as well, although not so much up and down, which explains why the head isn't quite at the right angle either, because again, it needed to look normal if he was stood flat. You've of course got the tassels on the hat and on the sailor outfit, and I believe if you remove this panel from the rear, it won't look quite as good, as well as sort of straighten out the elbows. Again, you may have to move the knees. You can indeed make the legs go flat as well, and this was deliberate, and trying to minimize compromise with that while keeping things looking nice and not like a robot was actually really, really difficult. The second big thing I wanted to address was texture. I really wanted this to be a smooth model. I wasn't going for a studded look with this one. I only used them very sparingly sort of on the lower torso to try and recreate some wrinkles, although a lot of that isn't going to show up here but will show up in real life because of the tiles and wedges I've used, which will end up creating sort of micro gaps and various different grooves along here, which hopefully should add to that flow without making it look too blocky. Whereas if you look at this in studio mode, it can tend to look a little bit rough, which can be a little bit awkward. Coming up for techniques as well, this was another one that was slightly new for me, as I've been building snot for a long time, but trying to come up with sort of stable snot cores that use bracket offsets and everything in the correct way was actually quite a challenge, and I had to sort of go back and redo things several times to make sure it would work. But some of my favorite ways that this sort of came out was in sort of around the shoulders and around the waist, where I was able to get a really nice flow into the legs. I was really quite worried about sort of scaling this or things being too thin, and I think if you look at him head on, there's a slight idea that the shoulders might be a little bit buff, like a little bit like puffy, a bit cartoonish, but you're not really supposed to be looking at it from that angle, and it's still kind of passable as human, especially now that the legs are on there, but it was a real panic before that. Other favourite details has to go to sort of the blue collar around the sailor's outfit as well, which are using a really wild mix of techniques to sort of get them on here. And again, making use of the really new parts in the portfolio. For those of you asking, this is a model that I want to do in real life and take to a couple of shows. However, the big thing holding it back right now is the second thing we'll get to, but firstly is the newer parts that I've been using, which are incredibly expensive to get on Bricklink. Some of the notable highlights include the new Speed Champions curves, which I've used to sort of do the shoulder blades on the back, as well as the newer ones on the knees as well, which create that sort of curvature which allows the leg to be super baggy around where it's sort of loosely hanging around his leg. And then there are slopes that are also on the sailor neckerchief, and actually the black cherries, which actually only came out on June 1st in a Creator 3-in-1 set, which I'm using for his curls, but I'm going to come back to the hair later. The second big challenge for this in real life is the medium tan, which was a color that I really wanted to do for his skin tone, specifically because of how Conan chooses to portray himself as well, which unfortunately I was not able to do in the minifigure version, which I did in Light Nougat, just because I was prioritizing facial expressions, which I know isn't ideal, but we wanted to use the medium tan, which has now actually been made possible thanks to, ironically, another LEGO Edition set, being the footballer line, which I had problems with the Lionel Messi specifically, has come in with a load of new parts. But it does mean that these are really extortionate on Bricklink, so I will not be buying these anytime soon. However, I do plan on doing it by the end of the year once these parts end up on PAB, which should be about 5 months after May 1st, so October, November time. I may wait for the Blue Spaceman helmet to be available as well. Moving up towards the head, this was a challenge. As soon as I set up a medium tan, you immediately knocked your palette in half. So I'm not particularly happy with the lower jaw. However, one thing I am happy with is the nose, into the ears, and specifically the hair as well. I was using a lot of my Brickheads knowledge as well as offsetting pieces in order to sort of create a sort of an accurate or semi-accurate head shape. And I suppose my biggest naivety here was that I thought this would be really similar to the Skyward Sword Link that we did at a slightly smaller scale. Now, once again, I want to highlight that these guys are very different scales. Like, I would reckon that this man here is 2 times as bulky as the Skyward Sword Link, because at his sort of thinnest waist, it is sort of 6.5, so 6 and towards 8 studs wide at any given point. Wider at the shoulders, of course, and that means that the head is a 3 wide construction with then snot work on the sides, which is actually remarkably similar to the Skyward Sword Link, who has a slightly oversized head and the same thing. But the big difference is there, I did him in tan, and none of the techniques I tried for that worked here. So this was a completely done from scratch, and was a big scary point, because if the body works but the head doesn't, then, well, you're in trouble. I also really like, as I mentioned, the use of the cherries, but I'm also using the new round sort of jelly piece, as I call it, and then the pyramidal piece as well, all in black to create some texture. And I'm really pleased with how the hair came out. It's super, super curly, and it's got that length to it that I wanted. Unfortunately, fortunately, I didn't have to worry about the top of the head. I was actually really looking forward to having the hair on the top. However, the hat blocks almost all of it, and that ended up being a good thing, because when I was prototyping the hair, it looked awful on the top. It actually only really looks great because it is sort of sandwiched by this hat. The hat was a bit of a letdown. I wanted the oval more than I wanted perfect rounding. I actually used brackets to slightly offset the dark red band here to sort of make it look like it was a little bit 3D, and I really wanted to make sure I sort of kept the opening in the middle where the sailor hat actually sort of dips down. And this was a really awkward build because it's sort of 3 wide, 4 wide, and a little bit of a mess. And the red band's not supposed to sit at the bottom of the hat, which is why there's that sort of little bit of tile layering at the front, but just disappears around the back. I did debate between dark red and normal red. I chose dark red in the end just because it looked better with the dark blue. The ribbon actually changes color depending on the lighting from my understanding, so I just stuck with this. And you can see the back of the sort of sailor's tabard come around the back side of here as well, using the dark blue to sort of create the sort of pouch, I don't know what you would call that, like flag thing, the the neck cloth, and I may try and use a little bit of excess Lego sticker paper to actually recreate sort of the right lines that go down that part, just because I think it would look quite good and it wouldn't be a legal technique as such. But actually one of my favorite details is obscured underneath that, because you got, again, more of those Speed Champions parts like I mentioned earlier, to sort of recreate with shoulder blading and give that back just a little bit more definition as well. You can see that sort of into sort of down the back and then into the bum as well, which needed to be rounded out, of course, to sort of work with the hips, especially considering that the main viewing angle here is from the side. And again, you can see me attempting to get more of those fabric folds in there as well, something that I effectively gave up on the legs. But before we get there, I want to talk again about how we attach those dangly blue tails from the sailor straps. I'm actually using the piece that was used on the shopping street roof that was the halo in the F1 collectible cars in white here, just to sort of give me the posability to sort of dangle them wherever I want. And I also want to talk about the hands, because just like in any art piece, the hands are always a menace to do, and with limited parts, and I mean really limited parts in medium tan, this was really awkward to get done. So technically he only has 4 fingers. However, the sort of the thumb can be represented around the other side with this piece that we used for the chin as well. All right, legs tying. These were the simplest and yet most important part to get right, because I really wanted the fabric to flow there, using the tried and true snot technique of having sort of the wedges on the side and just really choosing my angles and slopes carefully in order to make sure it sort of line up as best as possible, but also to really capture the shape I wanted. And that just left the right space in the bottom to attach some small shoe builds, which is actually probably the simplest part of the model. His left leg is wider at the bottom as well, and that is again to represent the fabric that we see on the album cover. And then the elephant in the room, of course, is the wishbone. Not my favorite part of this model, and actually isn't even symmetrical, because getting the hand to come across the chest to actually grab the thing was surprisingly difficult, using a bit of illusions here. It's a little lumpy for my taste. I may try a different technique for it, but this was really the only way I could see of giving it some actual thickness, but I was still giving it some posability. There is also the worry that if I don't buy the right joints for this, it's going to end up being really loose and potentially a problem there as well. However, for now, we'll just let it go. We'll see how it looks, and I can always fiddle with it in real life, as studio angles is just a real menace and a real difficulty to work with. But ultimately, I mean, it's flawed, yes, don't get me wrong, but I'm very proud of this model. I think it's done a great job of recreating what it is, and it fulfills that desire, I mean, not really, of wanting a minifigure for him, because it's not going to happen. As much as I actually am quite fond of the Olivia Rodrigo sets, it would have been really nice to sort of have him in there. Although, again, own identity, own branding, I completely understand why not. As I said, it was a naive part of me that hoped it would be. I'm also tempted to do one in the same scale as the link that we've done as well, because I actually really like that styling and it is kind of cute as well. So we may try middling one there to sort of complete the lineup between minifigure to medium to large here as well. But let's go back to taking a look at the base quickly, and let me talk you through the various different things I've tried here, because I really would like some feedback on this. So the current vinyl version uses ingots almost exclusively in sand blue to create a textured look for the backdrop. Now, it kind of looks like brickwork, which I don't love. There's really not a great way to do a watercolor style approach. In the minifigure's original cube, I use a combination of plates in mostly sand blue and light bluish gray to create sort of a stroke-like technique that we've seen on the Starry Night set and various different art projects. And I did originally try that, and I was going to build it entirely out of the cloud pieces that you can see in front of you now. However, it's just too big. It would cost an absolute fortune and would look really messy and actually detract from Conan. So what we wanted to do instead was do a simpler backdrop, which is where the ingots started to come in. And this actually came out of using the mosaic tool in studio, but that was again very messy and the colors didn't really work, and it sort of bodged it. So what I tried to do was replace the majority of sand blue with these ingots and stuff to add a bit more texture, and I quite liked how it looked. So then what I decided to do was go for this one here, where it is a sort of fully ingots, and then using the 3D clouds in a bit more of an equal balance to sort of give it a little bit more texture. Now I think I'm going to add some more clouds in this, but only if we actually decide that they work, because this is still a really large area to cover. However, it is worth noting that the sand blue ingot has appeared on the pad wall, and the grey clouds are currently on Bricks and Pieces, now becoming more common on Bricklink as well. And the trans blue clouds are again another June 1st part, which is actually what inspired this project in the first place, because I saw those clouds coming out and was like, wow, I can actually recreate my original concept for this model, which you're seeing on screen now, which is the minifigure version where I did use these clouds to make up the background. So I'm not quite sure whether this is a Legoized version that actually does work for me, because it does need to be slightly simplified in order to give him that sort of presence that we want. And then of course lastly, I do need to find a way to attach him to it. But if anyone else has any other ideas, I'm more than open, and I'd absolutely love to hear it, because yeah, I want to take this to conventions. I want to have this as an album cover. It's not the same as having a figure or play set, obviously. However, I do kind of think it's cool, and it was a special album, so I wanted to do something nice for it. So yeah, let me know what you guys think of it. Let me know what changes need to be made, what we're going to do to solve the base, and I will keep you guys updated when we do eventually build this guy in real life. and come later in this year. And I hope I've done him justice for you guys, really. So let me know your thoughts down below, and I will see you again very, very soon. Bye-bye.